first step to get prepared to sew is to thread our Rachel. And one of the things that I love about this machine is that you do get a nice little quick reference card, and on this sheet of paper it shows you all of the steps for winding a bobbin, and on the reverse side for threading your machine. So it's a numerical path that we're going to follow, and we'll start with the bobbin. Now to wind the bobbin, we need some thread, and you want to get your favorite sewing thread out. I've got a spool of Madeira Aerofill, which I like to use a lot, and it's going to sit right onto the spool pin here. When you place your thread onto the spool pin, it's nice that it angles up so you can easily access it. And then you want to put a spool cap on the end of your spool of thread. You get several different sizes of spool caps with your machine, and you want to make sure that you select a spool cap that is closest in size to the spool of thread itself. It should be flush up against the spool of thread so that the thread does not move side to side as you're stitching. And you want to make sure that if your spool of thread has any little hooks on the ends for catching the thread tail when it's not in use, that your spool cap completely covers those so that no threads get caught as you're stitching. The thread should be coming off the bottom of the spool, and that's going to allow it to feed very nicely through the machine as you stitch. Now your Rachel takes a class 15 bobbin, and you can get these from your Baby Lock retailer. It sits right onto the spool pin, and then you're going to turn it until you hear a little click. There it goes. And that is a little spring on the bobbin winder catching inside of the bobbin, and that's going to hold that bobbin straight as the winder spins it around to load it with thread. Now you're always going to have the best results when you use the bobbins that came with your machine. So even if you have a different Baby Lock machine, it may not have that same class 15 bobbin. So you want to make sure you're using the proper bobbins for your machine. And if it's a different machine brand, chances are it's a completely different bobbin. So you want to keep those straight. Now that we've got the bobbin onto the bobbin winding spool pin, we're ready to thread. Now you're going to follow a numerical path, and there are two numerical paths along the front of the machine. One is marked with a solid line. That's the path you want to follow for threading the needle. Then there's a second path with a dashed line. That is the proper path for winding the bobbin. So the first step is to take your thread off the spool and write to this guide here, just like this. And then the thread comes to this guide that stands up here. We're going to go under that little hook and then around the tension disc. And from there, we're going to take the thread to the bobbin, and you want to wrap your thread around clockwise 2 or 3 times. Now you don't need to put the thread into one of the holes on the bobbin because you're going to take it to the little thread cutter at the base of the bobbin winder. That's going to cut your thread and hold it steady when you begin to wind that bobbin. Now you're ready to engage the bobbin winder by sliding it to the right. Now that everything's set up, I'll simply put my foot on the foot control, and that is going to fill the bobbin. Now when your bobbin is filling, just to let you know, you do have the ability to adjust the speed of the fill of the bobbin by using your adjustable speed control. This affects how fast the machine sews, as well as how fast that bobbin winds. Or you can just keep a real consistent medium speed with your foot control. You can slow that down. And now, no matter how hard I put my foot on the foot controller, it's only going to fill at a medium speed. When the bobbin starts getting full, you'll see that the machine slows down a little bit, and that's your indication that it's time to let up on the foot control and stop. Okay, there we go. So it basically stops spinning, and that lets me know that my bobbin is full and it's time to stop. And now I can move the bobbin winding spool pin back to the left. That disengages that bobbin winding motor. And now I'll take my bobbin off, and now I can use one of the built-in thread cutters or a pair of snips just to trim that thread. I usually just use the cutter that's built in. Now that we have a perfectly wound bobbin, we're ready to set it into the machine. To insert your bobbin, you're going to start by removing the bobbin cover, and you do that just by moving this little lever to the right, and it kind of pops up, which I like. I love the top-loading bobbins on this machine because it's so easy to get to them to change your bobbins. Now you want to make sure that when you insert your bobbin that you have the thread tail hanging off to the left. Then you're going to place it down into the bobbin case, and there's a little arrow that follows right along, and it shows you exactly the direction that you want to pull your thread tail. So I'm going to catch it underneath of that plastic piece and follow the arrows, and it brings it right to a thread cutter. I can easily cut off the tail of the bobbin and then reattach the bobbin cover. It just slides on to the left side, and then give it a little push down and it catches in place. Now, one of the really nice things about this is you do not have to worry about bringing your bobbin thread up to the surface of the machine before you begin sewing. The Baby Lock Rachel is going to do all of that for you. So now that we've perfectly set our bobbin, let's thread the machine. Needle threading instructions can be found on the other side of the machine here. And one of the most important things to do is to make sure that you put your presser foot up. You always want to make sure that you thread your machine with the presser foot in the up position because that opens up the tension discs inside of the machine to make sure that your thread lies into those tension discs so that when the foot goes down to sew, it can grasp the thread and make sure that you have perfect tension. Now we're going to follow that solid line in the numerical path to the needle. So it starts with that same catch right here, and then we're going to take it out of this little tension disc. That's just for bobbin winding. Step number 2 for threading is this guide right here. We're going to come down the machine around number 3. Number 4 takes you up and over the take-up lever, back down. And then number 5, number 6, there's a little guide right at the very top of the needle. And the thread inserts that guide from the right to the left. I like to kind of put a little tension on the thread. Just reach it right down in there and pull it on over. And now the thread is being held nice and taut at the top of the needle. And here we get to utilize the integrated needle threader. Now to use that needle threader, you want to make sure that your needle is in the highest position. There is a registration mark on the hand wheel that you can line up, but the easiest way to make sure that your needle is in the highest position is simply by touching the needle position button right here. So I'm going to touch it once, and it lowers the needle all the way down, and then I'll touch a second time, and it brings it up to the highest position. Now before I use the integrated needle threader, I'm going to lower the presser foot just to make sure that when the needle threader comes down, it doesn't bump into the presser foot. Now here is the needle threader. I'm going to push down on this lever, and when I do that, it puts a little tiny hook right into the eye of the needle, and that is what is going to carry the thread through the eye of the needle. Now my thread is caught on this little guide on the needle threader, which is designed to give a little bit of tension to the thread and hold it nice and straight. And now I'm going to cross back over it and put the thread right into the prongs in the needle threader. And you'll be able to feel when it kind of catches. Right now it's caught nice and taut in the needle threader, and I can release that lever and it pulls a little loop of thread through the eye of the needle that I can then pull to the back. Now I can lift my foot and bring the thread underneath of the presser foot, and I'm all ready to stitch.